ਕਰਦਾ ਔਰ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਗੱਲ ਇਹ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ ਖਬਰਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਕਿ ਅੱਜ ਇੱਕ ਖਾਸ ਗੈਸਟ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ਾਮਲ ਹੋ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਖਾਸ ਮਹਿਮਾਨ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ਾਮਲ ਹੋ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ। ਸਰੀ RCMP ਦੇ ਸਾਰਜੈਂਟ ਐਲਨੋਰ ਸਟਰਕੋ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਈ ਵਾਰ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਰਿਲੀਜ਼ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ, ਮੀਡੀਆ ਦੀਆਂ ਖਬਰਾਂ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਨਾਮ ਸੁਣਿਆ ਹੋਣਾ ਸਾਰਜੈਂਟ ਸਟਰਕੋ ਦਾ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਨੂੰ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਕੀ ਇੰਸੀਡੈਂਟ ਹੋਇਆ ਜਾਂ ਕਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਸਰੀ RCMP ਦੱਸਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਕ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਦੇ ਸਟੈਟਸ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹਰ ਰੋਜ਼ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇੰਸੀਡੈਂਟਸ ਸ਼ਹਿਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਸਰੀ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ BC ਦੀ ਸੈਕਿੰਡ ਸਬ ਲਾਰਜੈਸਟ ਸਿਟੀ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਫਾਸਟੈਸਟ ਗਰੋਇੰਗ ਸਿਟੀ ਹੈ ਪੂਰੇ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੀ। ਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੇਖੀਏ ਤਾਂ ਵਨ ਆਫ ਦ ਫਾਸਟੈਸਟ ਗਰੋਇੰਗ ਸਿਟੀ ਸਰੀ ਹੀ ਹੈ। ਔਰ ਸਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਨੋ ਡਾਊਟ ਦੇਰ ਆਰ ਸੋ ਮੈਨੀ ਚੈਲੰਜਸ, ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਚੁਣੌਤੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਪਰ ਕਿਸ ਕਿਸਮ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਪੁਲਿਸਿੰਗ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਖਾਸ ਤੌਰ 'ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਉੱਥੇ ਆ ਰਿਹਾ ਉਹ ਹੈ ਗਨ ਵਾਇਲੈਂਸ, ਗੈਂਗ ਵਾਇਲੈਂਸ, ਇਹਦਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੈ। ਔਰ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਨੂੰ ਨਾਲ ਜੋੜ ਕੇ ਰੱਖਣਾ ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ। ਸੋ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਪੁਲਿਸਿੰਗ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਦੀ ਹੈ, ਇਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਪਿਛਲੇ ਹਫ਼ਤੇ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਡੈਲਟਾ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਦੇ ਆਫਿਸਰਸ ਆਏ ਸੀ। ਸਰੀ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਸਰਵਿਸਿਜ਼ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨਵੇਂ ਚੀਫ ਨੇ ਨੋਮ ਲਿਪਿੰਸਕੀ, ਉਹ ਆਏ ਸੀ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ। ਪਰ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਉਹ ਸਰੀ RCMP ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਸਰੀ RCMP ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਸੇਵਾਵਾਂ ਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਔਰ ਮੈਂ ਦੱਸ ਦਿਆਂ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਹ ਇੰਟਰਵਿਊ ਹੈ ਇਹ ਲਾਈਵ ਟੈਲੀਕਾਸਟ ਸਾਡੇ ਫੇਸਬੁੱਕ ਪੇਜ 'ਤੇ ਵੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਸੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ। ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਸਟੂਡੀਓ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੌਜੂਦ ਨੇ ਸਾਰਜੈਂਟ ਐਲਨੋਰ ਸਟਰਕੋ। ਗੁੱਡ ਮਾਰਨਿੰਗ ਸਾਰਜੈਂਟ ਸਟਰਕੋ, ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਸੋ ਮਚ ਫॉर joining us.
Oh, good morning, and thanks for having me.
Sergeant Sturko, first of all, I would like to know about the year 2021. Uh, how this year, going right now? What about the crime stats? If we talk about the violent crime as well as, the thefts.
Well, we're about to put online our report to the community, which actually features all of the full stats from 2020 compared with 2019. So it's the second year in a row that we've had this comprehensive report that's going to be available to the public. And it actually is very positive overall. We have a 9% decrease in violent crime, and property crime is actually down 16%. So, I heard in your intro talking about how we're the fastest growing city, and that is true. We're the fastest growing city with a very young demographic and a lot of different challenges in the city. But, we've had a lot of programs that are very successful, and a lot of it has to do with the way in which the community policing and our relationship with the community has come into play.
How important is the community policing?
Oh, it's very important. And actually, our police model for the Surrey RCMP is built on three separate pillars, community policing being one, intelligence-led policing being another. So this type of thing, working with the community, is actually very fundamental to what we're doing to be able to receive tips from the public, cooperation from the public, and just even to have people have confidence enough to call in to report crime so that we can address issues within the community. So building those relationships and being able to meet the needs of the community is obviously very fundamental to what we do here.
And when we're talking about the gun violence and gang violence, we have seen a recent spike, not only in Surrey, but in lower mainland. What is Surrey RCMP's approach, to deter these activities, and how you guys are dealing with this type of challenging situation?
Well, it's, not surprising that we see gun violence and that we see gang activity throughout our region, because it is a regional issue. And it's directly linked, in a lot of ways to the social issues that we see here in the Lower Mainland and across the country. There are links to addictions, our addictions crisis. Definitely gangs and violent crime is fueled by the drug trade. So we have to look at a faceted approach. So lots of different avenues to how we're dealing with it. We have, many people know that we have our Surrey Gang Enforcement Team, which is a big part of it. But it's not working in isolation. All of our programs work together to address this situation. So we have everything starting with our youth programs, our drug unit, just such a variety of police work across the detachment, all working together in a coordinated effort to address the issue on many different levels. But because it is a regional issue as well, we also work very closely with the CFSEU and with our other partner agencies, whether they're RCMP or municipal. I think we often deal with some of the same players in the situation. We're certainly dealing with a lot of the same social issues that are behind some of the demand for drugs. So working closely with our partners is also a big part of it.
But how is the RCMP staying ahead of crime instead of reacting to it?
Yeah, well, and that's always the challenge for any police agency. And so a lot of the proactive stuff that we do to stay ahead of crime is really directly linked to a lot of the community programs that we have and youth intervention programs and family intervention programs, starting off with recognizing some issues as they emerge before they become larger issues. So addressing, some youth activity or some signs of trouble within families, and that's working very closely with our school district here. But then on another level too, it's we have our police and mental health outreach team. So getting down on the street level or even within homes within Surrey to help people who are, for example, suffering from addictions to, get resources to help them deal with those social issues, to help on many different levels reduce the demand for drugs and to address problems that can lead to criminality.
I can understand there are so many challenges, and one of the biggest challenge right now is going on, though the mayor is saying it's a done deal, transforming, transition of Surrey RCMP to Surrey Police Department. How big challenge do you think this thing is for Surrey RCMP employees, especially for the police officers, when there is, there's a transition going on, and on the same hand, you guys are on toes to prove your abilities. So how big challenge do you think this transition period is?
Well, there's no doubt that it is a challenge, and from my own personal experience, I know that it's something that each of us at work think about probably on a daily basis. That being said, like our productivity that we've been able to show, this isn't something that just has happened in the last week or two. We're talking about now going on a 2-year process here. And yet our statistics show that we are being successful in addressing crime with our 9% decrease in violent crime, 16% in our property crime. So I think although it has had an impact definitely on our morale and on people's feelings of, comfort, you have to wonder what's going to happen in the future, whether you stay with the RCMP like myself or whether a person makes a personal choice to move on to a different agency. Still, there's a bit of uncertainty there that is a little bit unsettling, but you come to work every day, you join the police to make a difference in the community, and I think for the most part we're able to keep our mind on that purpose. We have a lot of community support. We continue to receive messages and beyond just the messages of support from the community. I just received some information yesterday, some stats that we actually saw an increase in the number of Crime Stoppers tips that we had over the last couple of months. And to me, those types of things where we see that engagement back from the community, where they really want to help us solve crimes, it really shows support. It shows that we're making an impact and we're able to connect with the community. So whether it ends up being that we continue to have this connection for, another decade, or whether it's a shorter period of time than that, I think that, we need to continue to focus on the results, try to keep those personal feelings to a minimum, but there's no doubt, you can't.
These are the mixed
ignore it.
feelings. I can
Yeah,
understand.
and you can't ignore it because, I think any person in their career, we all have to come to work and do our duty, but you
Yes.
have this nagging sensation that you're not standing necessarily on that concrete footing that you'd like to be on.
I know so many people, they are in favor of keeping RCMP in Surrey as well. We have seen so many, placards or boards inside of, so many residents' house, outside the houses. But on the other hand, when we are talking about the community engagement or gaining the trust, what key steps Surrey RCMP is, are taking, or what initiatives Surrey RCMP is taking to gain the trust of overall community? Not talking about one particular community, but overall.
Yeah, and I think that kind of public trust has to come on a variety of levels, and that's something that we certainly try to achieve as well. So, from our senior leadership team to right down to the constables on the front line, but we have created and have had for quite a long time our diversity unit, our Indigenous peoples unit. Trying to go and do outreach into the community to reach people on the level at which they would like to be engaged. So whether that's visiting businesses with our business team, or whether it's our property crime target team talking with businesses on target hardening. But we also actually have sought to recruit individuals from our community and try to have a very diverse workforce. And I think, it's fair to say that we are among the most diverse, certainly RCMP detachments in Canada, with over 50 languages spoken, people from a variety of backgrounds, people who are born in Canada, people who have immigrated to Canada. And I think that also helps, because when the community can see themselves reflected in the service that they're receiving, I think that goes a long way. And additionally, when you talk about sort of the diversity, it doesn't just mean what we are on the outside. It's about those perspectives that people bring. So, for example, in my unit that I work in, the Communications and Media Relations unit, we have women of color, we have Caucasian people like myself, LGBT, we have, men and women that work together. But every time we address an issue, so if an issue comes up or a topic or a problem that we need to solve, we're able to gain the perspectives of people from a variety of backgrounds. One of our coworkers is an immigrant. So when we're dealing with something, it's like everyone has a chance to have that input into their perspective of what things are really like in the community for them. And I think when you're a police service in a community as diverse as Surrey, having those different perspectives in problem solving and developing programs is really a key, so that when people see you in the community, it makes sense to them. We have the input and things resonate with the people who we're trying to serve.
But when we are talking about the force itself, we know that, we have in so many of our departments, including RCMP, the systemic racism is there. But when we are talking about the diversity, and you said we are the most, RCMP is the most diverse, community engagement, or, the number of officers are most diverse as compared to other police districts or police forces. How Surrey RCMP is ensuring, or Mr. Edwards, your boss, is ensuring that there is a space for everyone, there is a place for everyone?
Well, one of the things, I think it's not lost on anyone if you think back to the summer of 2020 and the social issues and the social justice that really came forward, and more space for voices to talk about racism. We see across the Lower Mainland different, still racism persists in many areas. And I think one of the things as a leader for us that Assistant Commissioner Edwards did was ask some of our units to do some reviews of public complaints that we've received in the past, to make sure that their racial bias has either been addressed if it existed, or to see that it existed at all. And continuing, I think, to have those open dialogues. One of the considerations that we have to think about is that, a lot of the dialogue and considerations of how, for example, some of our fundamental government establishments have been built over time, and potentially with racial bias built into them. Having now this opportunity to hear from the community gives us that chance to correct things. I think that we're just at the beginning, really, of making sure that we look at things like racial bias. It's been something that's existed for a long time in the RCMP training about racial bias, but it's still persisted across the country. This opportunity that we have now, with things being able to be so prominent in public discussions, gives us that opportunity to really address those things. And I think just by being so open, our senior leadership team is very open to those ideas, and not just open to ideas, but actually actioning them. Like I said, doing the review of public complaints, doing a review of our policies and the way that we carry out our is important. And we've continued to, our diversity unit reaches out to not just the South Asian community, but other communities within Surrey to get their perspective. How have you been treated by the police? What is your experience dealing with the Surrey RCMP? Not only listening to the concerns, but then actioning ways in which we can improve our service in the city. And I think that's how we can move forward and address by first understanding actually what are the problems that we're trying to solve.
Absolutely. We're just going to take a short break for the news, then we're going to come back and we have a certain more questions from you. We know you are busy, but
I always have time for you, Senior.
perfect. Thank you so much, Sergeant. CKSP 600 AM ਸ਼ੇਰੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਰੇਡੀਓ ਸੁਣਨ ਵਾਲੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਰੋਤਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਮੈਂ ਸਮੀਰ ਕੌਸ਼ਲ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰ ਫਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਨਿੱਘਾ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਕਰਦਾ ਔਰ ਸਾਡੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਸਰੀ RCMP ਦੇ ਸਾਰਜੈਂਟ ਐਲਨੋਰ ਸਟਰਕੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਸਟੂਡੀਓ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੌਜੂਦ ਨੇ So Sergeant Sturko, we just heard that last year Sri RCMP received more than 46,000 911 calls.
Those are abandoned 911 calls. So actually, we receive many more 911 calls than that, but the number of false or abandoned 911 calls was over 46,000.
So what do you mean by those abandoned or false calls?
It's when somebody mistakenly dials 911. So either they put their phone in their pocket and it accidentally, or maybe they were trying to call long distance, which we commonly see, and then it calls 911. So it happened over 46,000 times last year. And a lot of those cases, we actually have to dispatch officers because we really do want to make sure that it, isn't actually an emergency or someone in medical distress that's calling out for help and just can't speak.
So in what kind of emergency one should dial 911? Or in what type of emergency one should consider to dial 911 or non-emergency number?
Well, any emergency really. So if there's an imminent threat to safety or if there's a health issue or there is some type of danger that's occurring right now or someone is experiencing harm, then absolutely. And, it's better to call 911 if you think that something is happening and it's an emergency and you need help right now. We're never going to fault someone for calling because they need help. That's obviously what 911 is for. And these 911 abandoned calls, it's not because someone called to report, something they shouldn't, like maybe their favorite restaurant was out of food. These are not the same.
That's what I was about to ask. What if a cashier is not giving the money as they want to have
that's not
certain
a 911.
bills?
That's not a 911. Or if they're out of your favorite dipping sauce or something, that's definitely not time for 911. But these calls that we see so much of, hundreds even in a day sometimes, a lot of times they're from foreign cell phones. So a lot of people can get a cheaper rate, so they go to an independent cell phone carrier, like a lot of businesses we have here in Surrey, because they can get cheaper calling to different places like India, and they have it built into their phone because it's a different country's sort of phone. They have an emergency system on it that will call 911 just with one touch. There's a way of disabling that. So we actually do encourage people to disable those emergency functions if they can. And, the chance that you might need to call 911, hopefully you can use your keypad, but by removing that ability for just it to go off when you put it in your pocket will really save us a lot of time and, having to follow up on stuff. And there have been cases where we've seen actually hundreds of abandoned 911s coming from the same person.
What is the protocol you guys follow when you receive a 911 call?
Well, it depends on the circumstances, really, of the call. Sometimes, obviously, if they hear something in the background that sounds like any kind of distress whatsoever, we're obviously going to dispatch people there because there is cases where people are in trouble, but they can't say because, for example, if it's a domestic violence, they may call 911 and then simply leave the phone off the hook. So we're going to come to that emergently. We're going to come there with our lights and sirens to try to help. Or sometimes we might hear a child in the background, and there is a chance that it's a kid playing with the phone, but you never know. It could be also a child who needs help. So we're going to go to stuff like that. So what we really urge you is if you've tried to call overseas or if you've accidentally dialed 911, stay on the line because our call takers will be able to get some information from you and they'll be able to make a determination pretty quickly whether or not they need to send an officer there. If it sounds like everything is okay, reasonable explanation, we may not dispatch someone to come there. But the best line of defense for us is that if you could please disable that automatic calling for emergency function, and also make sure that if you do have that function on your phone that you're very cautious not to inadvertently sort of pocket dial the police.
Sergeant, we have seen in different movies as well how the police work when they are chasing any drug dealer or any, antisocial element. They are just pinning them down, putting their hands back and handcuffing them. But in real world, when police is dealing with crime towards children or kids, what is that approach looks like?
Oh, there's lots of, it doesn't matter the age of the person, whether it's a child or whether it's a very senior elder member of our community. The behavior of the officers is going to be dictated, their response is dictated by the behavior of the person that they're dealing with. So if we're dealing with someone that's armed or very violent or is causing harm or, grievous bodily harm or a risk of killing another person, obviously that's going to escalate the way in which we are behaving towards that person. You could have a very strong, robust person, and when they're very cooperative, there's no reason for us to be physical. And I can say, from my personal experience as a police officer, I've had a variety. I've had people who are very resistant or fighting, very violent, to people who you just say you're under arrest and okay, that's it, and it's just a matter of paperwork. So we see all kinds of stuff, but the way that we deal with people who are, we have reasonable grounds to believe have committed a crime, or people who are an imminent risk to the safety of others, really has to be dictated in the moment by the behavior of that person that we're dealing with. So lots of spur of the moment kind of decision making, and our training really does dictate that we have to make a full assessment of the situation when we're taking action.
Well, yesterday we had a very different kind of, incident happened in a park in Surrey, where there is, a 13-year-old was a suspect for a sexual assault case. How you guys are dealing with this type of crime?
Yeah, so that was actually a report to police that we received on the 5th of April. So on Monday, we got a call that a young child had been sexually assaulted in Blumsden Park in South Surrey. And our officers were able to quickly identify the person who is accused of that crime, or suspected of that crime, I should say. And they're just a very young person as well. So there's a lot that goes into dealing with stuff like that. But in Surrey RCMP, we also have Sophie's Place, which is a child advocacy center that the RCMP works very closely with. And it really is a place where we have a lot of resources available to help us deal with things like abuse of children, sexual crimes involving children, and other things with vulnerable people. And it's set up in a way where the officers that work there are part of our special victims unit. They have special training to deal with taking interviews from young people, dealing with children. They are informed on trauma, and they have a lot of experience in dealing with this type of thing, not just for victims, but also with people, especially if it's a young person accused of a crime that has a sexual nature. We work really closely with the Ministry of Child and Family Development, and they're going to be looking at all the circumstances to even determine in a situation like this if the young person would, if charges are appropriate, or if there's another way in the community that we can deal with it. It's not to necessarily be punitive all the time. What we should be looking at from a public safety point of view, and this is the approach that we're taking in this case, is looking at what the best outcome will be. We want to make sure that the person who is the victim of this crime is well supported and receives what they need in their family. We want to make sure that when we're dealing with the young person who is suspected of the crime, that they also are receiving support, and if there is interventions that are needed to help prevent any further, criminal activity, that they also receive that support, and their family as well. So it's more of a holistic approach to looking at these crimes. Children are particularly vulnerable, and they need special consideration. So we're very fortunate, and I'm very proud that in Surrey we have Sophie's Place.
But when you're saying that they need a specific kind of treatment during maybe the process of investigation, so the officers, those who are designated for this particular Sophie's Place, does they have a special training?
Yes, they do. So there is some courses that they will receive in the RCMP and also external to the RCMP that have to do with taking statements from children and recording information from children. We have to make sure that, just as in any investigation that we do, in any interview that we do, that we are impartial and not leading people into the statements that they're making. And that's even more so with children, making sure that children understand the difference between right and wrong, for example, and making sure that they understand the type of information that they're providing is truthful. And but also not re-traumatizing people as well when we're taking interviews from them. For some people, just even being around police can be very daunting, can be intimidating. So they try to create an environment there that's, conducive to being with children, especially, and for their families as well. I can't imagine, as a parent myself, how it must feel to be both, from both sides, the parent of the victim and also the parent of the person that's accused. We're still talking about a very young person who's just 13. 12 years old is considered a child in Canada. So, it's really complex, and I think it's a painful situation no matter how you look at it.
How many illegal weapons have been, seized by Surrey RCMP last year, if you have those numbers, or how many drugs have been seized off, drug labs, if you have any record with you?
I don't have the specific number, but I think people, I really encourage you, if you don't follow our Facebook yet, please follow Surrey RCMP or on Twitter at Surrey RCMP. We, on an almost weekly basis, put out some of our successes that we have. We continue to make those kinds of targeting of unlawful weapons, drugs, clandestine drug operations, and drug trafficking is a big priority for us. We have seen across the province that overdose deaths have tragically risen.
Surrey is number 2 in that.
It's just awful. And so one of the ways in which we are doing our part, we're not healthcare providers, but we do have a role to play. So our role is to try to find those sources of very toxic, potentially fatal sources of drugs in the community and to eliminate those. It really is a sad situation because, when there are people who are sick with addictions, and it is an illness, and then there are those in the community who would prey upon their illness, exploit that for money, and that's where we see the drug trade, we see things like gang activity. And, so from our point of view, our role in this is to root out those who are distributing potentially deadly drugs in the community and also try to cut off that supply of money that's really fueling gang activity in the Lower Mainland.
What is your conviction rate? If you have any
Oh, gosh, I don't have it. But you know what? I'm really proud that we actually do have quite a good one. It's beyond just getting the drugs off the street. It's the follow through for court. And I think the sort of dazzling part of policing is those, when you see those photos of all the gear that we grab off the street, all those weapons. But there's so much more behind the scenes, just the paperwork. They don't advertise that in the recruiting video, the paperwork involved in being a police officer, and just the work that gets done in the disclosures to Crown and some of the complex investigations we have here. We work with the BC Prosecution Service to make sure that we're delivering a good product so that when it does go to court, that the cases that we're presenting can stand up and that we can convict people.
And what message would you like to deliver to young parents or residents of Surrey, or even, in fact, British Columbians?
It's kind of a time when we see a lot of negativity right now. I think not just, criminality. I'm talking about we're in the middle of a pandemic. It's been a rough time, but I think it's important for us all to remember that there is way more good out there than bad. Sometimes what gets highlighted, especially in my job, is some of the bad stuff that's happening. But by and large, we see way more good people in Surrey and in British Columbia. And I just keep up the good work, everybody. Thanks for all your support in the community. Our officers do really appreciate it. Thank you for sending all your tips. And, I just wish everybody out there the best of luck. And hopefully, if you see me on the street, please say hi.
One of our councillor, Jack Hundell, he says, way to go, Surrey RCMP. Excellent. Thank you, Jack Hundell. Thank you so much, Sergeant Elenore Sturko.